As you can see, Article 33(2) of the Convention provides for the establishment of a state party of a framework including one or more independent mechanisms to promote, protect and monitor implementation of the Convention. And the independent mechanism for Northern Ireland, is, or IMNI to use the acronym, is represented by the Equality Commission and Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, established in 2009, shortly after UK had ratified the Convention. And IMNI comprises part of the UK independent mechanism alongside the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the Scottish Human Rights Commission. A small joint committee, which includes representatives of the two commissions, takes forward the work of the independent mechanism. The independent mechanism has carried out a range of activities to promote, protect and monitor the Convention, and I'll try to give a brief outline of these over the next couple of slides. In relation to stakeholder engagement, in 2010, just shortly after the ratification of the Convention, we held a major conference to provide an opportunity for engagement with stakeholders, including persons with disabilities and their representatives, government, public bodies, and of course the independent mechanism. We hosted a round table on legal reform with persons with disabilities, and then held a major conference to promote legal reform. We've promoted involvement of persons with disabilities and disabled people's organisations in the evidence gathering process through the research on the Convention implementation, which we have commissioned. We've promoted engagement in the monitoring process through a number of targeted events with stakeholders and through our publications and website. We've organised a number of training sessions for persons with disabilities and their organisations on various aspects of the Convention. In 2015, we organised training on the Convention for officials involved in the development and implementation of the disability strategy, delivered by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and Dr. Eleanor Flynn from the Centre for Disability Law and Policy at NUI Galway. And we also offered this training to members of our Legislative Assembly, our MLAs. We've promoted implementation of the Convention by government departments through our policy influencing work, highlighting the relevance of CRPD rights to a range of issues, for example, welfare reform, health service reform, special educational needs, legislative reform, transport, housing, and so on. And we've also engaged with the government on the development of its strategy to improve the lives of persons with disability 2012 to 2015. More recently, unfortunately, we have to say, we've met with representatives of the Department of Communities to raise our concerns about the lack of progress in relation to the disability strategy and to advance our priorities for the delivery plan for Indicator 42 of the Programme for Government, which was referred to earlier on, which seeks to measure average life satisfaction score of persons with disabilities. And with respect to this indicator, we have advised that the department should use the UNCRPD as a framework for delivery of the plan. We've published a range of pamphlets on the Convention, including the text, guidance on using the CRPD to effect change, making a complaint under the Convention, getting involved in the monitoring and reporting process, and the role of persons with disabilities and their organisations. In terms of protection, we've provided advice to persons with disabilities on the Convention. We take Convention issues into account when deciding whether or not to support specific anti-discrimination cases, and we facilitated the Belfast leg of the inquiry by the CRPD committee under Article 6 of the optional protocol into the impact of welfare reform in the UK on the enjoyment of certain Convention rights, which some of you may have heard about. In respect of monitoring, we've commissioned a number of major pieces of research into the implementation of the Convention in Northern Ireland. The first of these we commissioned from Disability Action. And indeed, both pieces of research, I'll talk about the other one in a minute, involved Dr. Brona Byrne, who will be talking to us later on in summing up the outcome of today. So the first piece of research by Disability Action highlighted 3 cross-cutting areas where the requirements of particular articles of the Convention appeared to be inadequately implemented in terms of fundamental compliance. The first of these was awareness raising. So there was no sign that there was really a joined-up approach or strategy to raising awareness throughout society, which is the wording used in the Convention. In terms of participation in public and political life, the report noted that representation of persons with disabilities, although representing roughly 20% of the population, only were represented between 1% and 2% in the membership of public bodies. It also noted that access to information and the issue of collecting relevant statistics on Convention implementation was also lacking. The most recent research in 2014, led by a team from Queen's University, noted that the 3 areas of gaps in the previous report were still there, but they added they highlighted some additional gaps. First of all, in relation to equality and non-discrimination, Article 5, the research highlighted the legislative deficit between Northern Ireland and Great Britain following the introduction of the Equality Act 2010, which just very briefly outlaws a number of forms of discrimination. For example, discrimination by association or perception, the asking of the prohibition of asking health-related questions in job interviews, and so on. Those forms of discrimination are outlawed in GB, but still permitted in Northern Ireland. Equal recognition before the law, the whole issue of the resourcing of mental capacity legislation. We do have a new Mental Capacity Act, but the big question is will the resources be made available to realise the objectives of the Act in reality? Also a deficit in terms of Article 19, independent living. And more recently, we've seen the closure of the Independent Living Fund, for example, to new applicants. In terms of education, the research highlighted the risk from the proposed SEN reforms, that these would lead to a dilution of existing entitlements for children and young people with disabilities. And it remains to be seen how the reforms work in practice. In terms of Article 25, health, the research drew attention to a lack of community-based programs to train persons with disabilities on sexual health issues and well-beings, and to concerns about the impact of the Transforming Your Healthcare Reform Strategy on persons with disabilities. Finally, with respect to the adequate standard of living and social protection, the research drew attention to concerns that persons with disabilities are likely to be disproportionately affected by welfare reform. Now, on the basis of this research and associated engagement with the sector, the independent mechanism developed a jurisdictional parallel report on the implementation of the Convention in Northern Ireland, which together with our legal casework, responses to government consultations and policy work, helped to inform our report to the UN. We've also taken into account reports from DPOs, NGOs, academic sources and regulators in formulating this report. With respect to engagement with the sector, we've been actively involved in engaging civil society and particular disabled people and disabled people's organisations within the monitoring process since the UK ratified UN CRPD. For example, we held a number of evidence gathering workshops on particular Convention articles. We held a number of events throughout Northern Ireland to identify and refine the key issues for inclusion in our submission to the CRPD committee. We held a number of events to encourage stakeholders to get involved in the reporting process. And we used our parallel report as the basis for our contribution to the UK Independent Mechanism list of issues, interim and final reports, both of which have been shared with the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the rapporteur.